This is Lee Gerrard-Barlow, and welcome to Arcana Podcasts. And I'm here with a very good friend of mine, and a dear friend of mine, and very honoured guest, Tonalise Rugas. Is that right?
Yeah, it's rightly. People do ask, and I tell people to call me Mona Lisa with a T because it tends to be easier. But we've been friends for a few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me introduce you to our viewers. So Tonalise is a consecrated ceremonial magician, a Freemason, Lady Freemason, and free thinker, and a storyteller and meditational facilitator, as well as being, like myself, a certified NLP master practitioner. So I've known you for, I would imagine, well over 12 years now. And as I know that over the last few years, you've entered into quite a magical space in your life. I mean, quite literally a magical region. So
Yeah.
tell us about this, where you've ended up.
Yes, I mean, I ended up in two pretty magical spaces. I left London, and I moved to Joshua Tree, California, which is a place that calls people. Very hot, very sunny, very masculine. And then things happened in life. And before I went to Joshua Tree, I'd visited the south of France in the Occitanie region up in the foothills of the Pyrenees a few times. And that's another part of the earth that has that power to call people in. And for me, it was almost like an alchemical need to share my time between these two places, given that here where I'm now, which is now up in France, where I spend my summers and early autumn, is that it has a very lunar, feminine feel to it, which is very much recorded and also reflected in the history and worship here. So I left London and I went to these two places to try to find some kind of balance between dualist poles, if you want. It's working on many levels with the challenges that comes to it. But right now, yes, I'm up in the French Pyrenees here, which is a stunning part of Europe, and it feels a bit wild. Even the French call it sauvage, which means wild.
Savage.
Yeah.
So that's the region of Occitania.
Yes, Occitania is huge. It kind of stretches from north of Bordeaux, and the wine region, so to speak, which is very much reflected here in people's lifestyles. But old Occitania stretched far in towards the what's now the Côte d'Azur and Monaco, and down into Italy, parts of Italy, and to this day, Italian and Occitan is a official language in Italy. Not so in France, given they're very connected to la langue, the French language, not the Languedoc, which is the old name of the whole region here, which the language of the Occitan. So
what made you end up in that particular region? What brought you
well,
there?
like I said, it's a region that has some kind of calling to it. It can be hard to explain, but sometimes you come to a place and you literally put your feet on the ground and you go, oh, there it is. And this was one of those regions, and that there are superficial reasons, but also his history here is very different from French history. Also the Occitanian people, it's a real people, it's an ethnical group. They have their own language and their own culture. And I compare it to the normal French. It's the nose is not always pointing upwards, if you know what I mean. They're a friendly bunch. The food is amazing, and that's one of those superficial reasons that people are not necessarily wealthy here in monetary terms, but they live and eat and like kings and queens. And there's a pride in this region, and sometimes I say that history is so dense here that I can actually feel almost difficult to breathe. You know, you're surrounded by it. And,
Yes, that brings me on to my next question. Really, I mean, obviously, I know, me knowing you, that wouldn't be the only reason why you're there, because of the obvious beauty and the quality of life. I'm pretty sure that there's a lot more of an underlying kind of historic and esoteric, shall we say, undercurrent going on there. So,
Right.
could you tell us a bit more about that? What you've discovered?
Yeah. Yeah, you know that the undercurrent here is ancient, and that's you know, I'm a good old Capricorn. I like a break from the new world, which I live in 6 months a year. So you know, when you come here and you feel the actual age of things, it's different. Not just remaining in buildings and historical monuments, but you know, the actual current here is absolutely ancient. So you're on the surface, it's good old Catholic France, but you know, it's just so much more than that. And having spent time here, it's easy also to see that, you know, some of the biggest limestone caves are here. So people would come literally out of Africa in prehistoric times and settle in this region, and use these caves as both, you know, splendid shelter. There's always been a kind of string of current of worship here of the feminine, and that is very much reflected in myth and legend, which has remained all up to the Albigensian Crusade, when, you know, one can simply say patriarchy took over, but you know, it was just so much more than that. You know, the people here flew in the face of the Church of Rome and paid dearly for it. So
Okay, I've just in connection with what you're saying, the Visigoths and the whole area that you're speaking about. You sent me a picture of this here.
yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about this place?
Yes, this is the old Cité de Carcassonne, which is you know, the old city of Carcassonne. You know, the new city is also built around it, but you know, the old city has been restored and it's in really great nick. It's a medieval fortress, and the foundations of that place goes back to it was built by pre-Roman people. The Romans then continued it, so you know, the Visigoths, the Romans. So the old foundations are absolutely ancient. There's a cathedral in there as well. This is not just a series of buildings. This is a fortified living city. People live in there. They have their businesses,
Wow.
restaurants in there. And there's a cathedral in there that is absolutely beautiful. The basilica, you know, because the Pope's been.
Wow.
So it's the Basilica of Saint-Nazaire, and that was the oldest part of that goes back to the Visigoths, and it was built in the 4th century. So you know, it's absolutely ancient. So people here, however, they're just living there, and tourists obviously come. It's the world's first UNESCO heritage site, and it's been restored quite faithfully, apart from the turrety towers, which is more a historical thing or an architectural thing that comes from the north of France. It's likely that, you know, the instead of being very pointy, those would have been flat on top or curved, but or like you see you know, a bit square. But it's a wonderful place there, and very important in the history of the region, and you know, also the history of the dualist sects here, the history of the Cathars and the Fadites, and you know, the Albigensian Crusade and the history of the Middle Ages.
So who were the Visigoths?
Well, the Visigoths were they were German, or well, Germany is a new thing, but you know, Teutonic barbarians, really. I mean, they came down in search of better pastures, as people did, and they did really well. You know, with some kind of Teutonic drive. they came down towards Greece and towards Rome, and then split in two. So you had the Eastern Goths, mostly early Christians, founded the Orthodox side, and then the Visigoths, or the Western Goths, that came this way and ruled this area for a very, very long time, and not just here, but most of the Iberian Peninsula was divided between the Visigoths and the Moors, and the Moors managed to push back the Visigoths a little bit, which changed the culture there a lot. But in this area here, eventually they were pushed out by Romans and by other, after a long time. Power always changes hands in Europe, but the Visigoths were in power for a long time, and in this area, they have left behind an architectural legacy and a legacy of kind of a feeling of independence almost. But their watchtowers are either on top of hills and pogs, and a pog, we call it a pog here when it's a puy, when it's something between a hill and a mountain.
Oui, yeah. Like I lived for quite a while in the Puy-en-Velay as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's a puy.
In that mountainous region.
My village is Puy-Laurence, and that's under an 11th century Cathar castle, which is pretty famous. But as for the Visigoths, their watchtowers are everywhere, rounded, and some of the very early churches and chapels are here and built by them. So it's these buildings are still standing. They've been kept in good because they've been used throughout the ages and taken.
So we've also got some interesting place names as well that seem to resonate. Names which seem to resonate from very old times. Could you tell us a bit about that in that area?
Are you thinking about the Bell villages?
Yes, for example, those types of names, and Minerve. Well, is quite interesting.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Well, the Occitania here, the Pyrenean part of Occitania, was one of the very, very first places in Europe our ancestors settled and worshipped deity, and that was within the caves. So found in these caves are fetishes to this day, and time went, and it's likely, it turned into a lot of goddess worship in the region. I know we'll show a fetish in a bit, and I'll talk about it. But if we're jumping the gun here a little bit, the goddess worship in the region where is ancient, and it's Belisena, Belisama, Astarte, and Cybele, and all the mother goddesses. Or goddesses that's related to the mother goddesses were worshipped here. And for instance, the villages that starts with Bel, they are often built in places with natural water sources coming out of the mountain or the ground, and source used to be a holy place, and it's the root word for sorcery. But the Bel villages here is like Belesta, Belvian, there's a lot of them. And Bel means inner light, or light, and goes back to Belisama.
I was going to say the actual bell is also quite often associated with the sun in some other cultures, which is interesting because there's a lot of evidence to show that the goddess worship was quite often more solar than quite often lunar, and a lot of the lunar gods were actually gods, and a lot of the goddesses were actually solar. It's kind of interesting.
Indeed, but in this region, the solar deity would have been, because dualism always stood strong here, which I'll mention in a bit. But the male deity Belenos would have been the Belisama would have been the earth, and Luna, the brightness of the sun, of the masculine current. Which is hugely different from the patriarchal current, but the masculine current, Belenos, and then Belisama, which is the earth current, the darker current, the nightlight. So anyway, so the inner light is the nightlight. So the Belle villages are more or less, it's nothing to do with belle meaning beautiful in French, you know, they're situated in gorgeous places, and it has to do with an inner light, and often they are built on you know, which is not unusual here, that they're built on top of it would have been a place of worship, an early temple, and the Celts were big on it. So, you know, if you see a village that starts with bell, you know it's really, really built on an ancient place.
Yeah.
And so how do I explain Bellicena? It's just, you know, it's almost like Cybele, Start, Minerva. And the Romans came here due to all our water sources and the minerals.
Hence Minerva.
Absolutely, in Venus, down in the Les-les-Bains. It's like one is not really sure whether the old abbey there is built on top of a Celtic temple or an Isis temple or a temple to Venus, but it's an ancient temple. It depends what source you're listening to. I really wanted it to be Isis, but I'm not sure because of the source is not reliable, but it's likely it's built on a bell space, like a Celtic temple that was their first, and you know and then the holy spot would have been recycled. But these things are always near water sources, and what would have drawn the Roman the worship of Roman deities would have been the sources that are here. So yeah, near here is a village called Minerve, literally named after Minerva. Incidentally, is one of those villages where they managed to burn a particularly large amount of Cathars, or dualist sects later in the during the Albigensian Crusade. But Minerva is there today. It's a beautiful place, and when you go there, you can see why people would have taken refuge there, because it's literally surrounded with gorges, and it's it's like a hog that sticks up in the middle of the gorge. So you can't drive a car in there. You're not really allowed to. You can if you're a delivery person, but you have to cross a bridge to get into it. So they fortified and defensive architecture always was big here. People had to watch their backs. But Minerva's there, done in Alette-le-Bain, Alette of Baths, which also have where the temple was that I just talked about, and the old abbey, that back to the 9th century.
And a lot of these places have still got the curative values as springs and as baths that they always did.
Absolutely. Alette is important, and in fact, there's a statue to Minerva on the old medieval town square there. She's still standing. So hence she would have been absolutely important in that area. And the spring in Alette is still, that people go down there with their water bottles and fill them up. And it's been analyzed, this water. It's good for you. It's full of minerals. It's full of sulfur and copper and iron and stuff that the body needs. And incidentally, also now Alette water is one of the oldest trademarks in France. So this place has attracted people for a very, very long time. And one of the attractions there, aside from the medieval village, the ancient abbey, the spring itself, and the Minerve thing, is the house of Nostradamus' grandparents. So where Nostradamus, who is a historical figure, whatever one thinks about predictions, he spent a lot of time in Alette growing up. So that's a kind of blue plaque space there. It's one of the old pre-medieval houses there.
So let's go back quickly to what you were saying about the Cathars, because I know that you've got some of your own specific views on the Cathars, and I know that there's a lot said about them, a lot kind of speculated about them, a lot of ideas thrown around in the mix these days about who these people were. So, but could you let us know a little bit about your own findings, your own conclusions about this particularly enigmatic culture? Tell us what you understood to be their beliefs.
Well, that's a very difficult question to ask, but I'll do my best I'll do my best with that. First of all, I'm just going to, if you talk about the Cathars, you kind of have to shout out to the Occitan or the Languedocian Tourist Board for their how do I put it, profilation of that term. So even now, when I was talking about the old monastery in Alex, the old abbey, there's a sign there and it says "Bienvenue à Pays Cathar," welcome to Cathar country. It's no sign at all that that place had anything to do with the Cathars. What's more interesting there is, an act of necromancy, and I think it's a bit off topic, but it's still fun, that happened there in the Middle Ages, where the nobles and the monks had a fight on who should take over as abbey, take over the abbey and run it. And they couldn't really make their mind up after the old abbot had died. So the nobles won. They literally had a fist fight. So they dug up the old abbot, dressed him in, exhumed his body, dressed him up, and cursed him, put him to trial and cursed him. So that's how things would change hands. So, but this was not unusual. So behaviors like that would have been very alien to the Cathars to kind of come into that, because they were famously not very much into their bling, or their monasteries and shiny stuff and amazing churches and abbeys, which they would have seen as an absolute abomination and a proof that life on earth is literally hell, and that's a part of that dualism, that life on earth is hell, and what everything, our bodies, everything is of the devil. So they tried in this lifetime to live as little of the devil as possible. So one should never, for instance, eat anything that was a result of procreation, which was of the devil, because you shouldn't bring children into this hell. So the ideal was to live in celibacy and not to father or mother, sire children. It's almost like Søren Kierkegaard, we're doomed. This is hell. We should just make ourselves die out. Also, eating flesh or eggs or drinking milk or anything that had to do with procreation was also banned. So they would have been plant-based and fish. So the Cathars with or the dualist sects came in here from different different sources. The Bogomils of Bulgaria was huge there, which one of the Nicetas came and spread the word, and it caught on. People really had sympathy with this and empathy with it, and the Cathar prefecti or you can
the perfect ones,
kind of bishop status, the leaders would often travel in pairs and go into villages and help people. And then if you wanted to join them, you could do so, and you could support them, and then you could have a family. But if you wanted to be really real about this and be initiated, so to speak, you would go through a ceremony called a consolamentum, that we have no idea what it consisted of, apart from the fact that hands were seen to be put on bodies, words were spoken, and this ceremony somehow also unleashed some emotion in the person that was initiated in that way. And if you had to go through that ceremony, then you were expected to be a perfecti and live simply in celibacy without much bling. They were known as the weavers as well, because they saw weaving as almost a sacred thing, because you would, weave your own life and stuff. Many say that they were completely egalitarian between genders. Not true, but women could be perfecti. They had women bishops, some notable ones, and somehow they were also very much loved and respected by the aristocracy, and many members of the aristocracy, including a couple of the Roger Raymonds, the Toulouse, and the Trinquevel, a few of the Trinquevels and the Foix clan, you know, Esclamont de Foix, which is almost like a Cathar high priestess, they were perfectees, and which meant that they had to give up all possessions. And sometimes if they didn't become perfecti and just supported the Cathars and helped them out in their quest to take over people's hearts and minds, which they very much did, they would be persecuted by the Roman Church, and often their castles and riches would be confiscated. These aristocrats would be known as fadits, you know, people who supported the Cathars, and there was a lot of them. So this was a big thing, you know, and it caught the eye of the Roman Church, who did not at all like that the Cathars literally said stuff about, you know, wealth is bad. You know, you don't say that in the face of the Roman Church, for whom wealth is paramount for many reasons, but also a way that they would, you know, build incredible and show off. They did not like the fact that women could be clergy, which, you know, they still don't like that. So that's not allowed, can't be done. So there were many reasons, and they didn't like the fact that it made people very independent. It would have been very free thinkers, because people's relationship to wealth would change, people's relationship to family and each other would change, and, you know, obviously people's link to almost being dependent on the church to feel that they were worthy of life would change massively in a region that was one of the richest in Europe.
So it would end up being more of a sort of direct relationship to deity rather than through intermediaries in that sense.
Indeed, and you know, this region also was one of the very richest in Europe. You know, you just drive around and you see everything grows here. You know, that they say that you throw a pile of seeds, it will grow. The wine trade had come. There's lots and lots of minerals everywhere, and water.
So you sent me this picture of this castle. Could you tell us a little bit about this?
I'm looking at that. That's the Cathar castle. There's a few of those. We have one just up the road from me that's called Pyrenees Castle. This is Carcassonne. And I picked this one because, you know, when you look at the platform on top there where the people are standing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's in fact the oldest part of it. That's the old keep. And that's the one that dates back to Middle Ages. It's built sometime, you know, it's like 11th, 12th century would have been started, and the kind of circular shape there would have been the oldest part. It's fascinating walking through it because those walls are just freakingly, you can see how thick. No, these castles were absolutely untakeable, and they were also built in a way that people call them occultés, because, you know, they, as you can see, they literally go straight up from the bedrock. It's almost like they present as part of the mountain. How on earth they did that, you know, with great talent and skill. Yeah. So these were built as, you know, this is Carcassonne, which is part of the so-called Sons of Carcassonne. It's like Perbeteuse, Carabus, Pilorance, and it's a little series of them that goes from along the Spanish, what would have been the border to Spain and Aragon. These castles ended up as sanctuaries for the Cathars and the Fadists. So Carcassonne was never taken. The Cathar castles tended to be susceptible to siege. You know, they were seen as more or less untakeable, even with siege engines. And when they were taken, it was often because of some kind of treason. You know, when they finally took Montségur, it has to do with somebody managed to sneak up there in liaison with the Inquisition. And poison the water, which wasn't difficult, or rats. this one here, Kiribus, has a very intricate water system of rainwater that they collect all the way down to the cistern. So they would have there's a village straight under it, Cucugnan, which would have belonged to them, so they wouldn't have lacked anything. And another interesting thing about them is Kiribati is relatively near to the ocean, so they would have seen if somebody would come. And there's a series of hilltops here, they're really high up, so they would be able to communicate with fire. So they would light a fire, and which would have been seen in Carcassonne, so which would have been then seen by Tolerance, which would have been seen by Ussat, which would have been seen by Puvert, and then Montsegur would have seen that, and then Roquefixade would have seen that, and then Roquefixade would have been able to shine a light down to Poix, so which is several hours drive in a modern car from the ocean. So within hours, they would have known that, okay, the Inquisition's coming, prepare for siege. So this is, medieval architectural technology and military defense building. So it's highest. It's really fascinating to walk around in that.
So we'll move on to the question really here of the Black Madonna, which we also see a picture of here. So yeah, tell us about that, because obviously this region,
yes,
as well as everything else you've already said, has got incredible connections with the tradition of the Black Madonna.
Yeah, the Black Madonna is a really quite mysterious thing, and it's an extension of the goddess worship here. There she is. This one's in Montsegur, and the one in Montsegur is made out of wood. Sometimes they were carved out of black stone. And this one is a copy of the famous 6th century one in Montserrat, which is on the Spanish side.
Yeah, the Lady of Montserrat.
Yeah, it's not a recent copy. It's a very ancient copy. Yet, though, it's it really has its own kind of presence. They have a fabulous presence, these things. And again, that goes back to the mother goddess or the earth goddesses that were worshipped and since time immemorial here. Since people came into caves. Why is she black? And that's has nothing to do with ethnicity, by the way. And a lot of people would claim that it just doesn't. So the history of her goes back to, as we know her today, the oldest statues of her. There are some really ancient ones come through our churches here. It's lots of the statues were discovered around the 11th or 12th century, often in fields, often by dogs, or in trees. Yeah. And the curious thing about it is that she would have refused to leave the place that she was found. And how would that be? It would be either she would make herself heavy. People said they literally couldn't move the statue. And these are just 50 centimeters. They're not big at all. They're smallish statues, often in wood. So, and one case down by Limoux, where they have the Notre-Dame de Marseille, a Black Madonna, which was found in a field in the 11th century by a dog. The farmer took her home, thought it was so dull, gave it to his children, and she kept kind of emerging again in the place she was found, and he just couldn't kind of conceal this thing and contain it. So he spoke to the priest, and they agreed it was a Black Madonna. It was a mother of the earth. So they built the basilica, which is now basilica because the Pope's been around the statue, and that's how it often happened. So if you would find a Black Madonna statue, you would build a church or a holy building or a basilica around her. She has to be found in places, I said fields and trees, but yes, fine, but it always needs sources, water sources, and often near caves, caverns, which also goes back to the cave of the feminine, which every woman has. So they're really dark in color because of the color of the earth. They are the color, that they are of the earth. There's no doubt about that, of the earth or the nightlight.
And even sometimes related to meteoric
Yes,
black meteorite material.
some of them would have been carved out of black stone, and there's a lot of
Mm.
meteorite activity in this area here in the Pyrenees.
Yeah.
It's obviously that would have seen as holy, coming from the heaven with the color of the earth. But the cult of the Black Madonna linked directly to the earth goddesses of the pagan tradition. It literally is pagan goddess worship in plain sight, built around churches. But in this particular, you find Black Madonnas all over France, sometimes in Italy. There's a couple of them in Germany. And in Spain they have plenty, and the Spanish ones are funny because they're very ornate. The Spanish, they like to dress them up, whereas here in France they don't too much. But here in France, in the south of France, in Occitania particularly, she is often paired with a saint called Saint Roch. And bear with me with this, because this illustrates the alchemical quality of her. Saint Roch was born. He's a real dude. Man lived. He walked history, and he was born in Montpellier in 1348. So very recent for this area. But he gave up all his possessions and traveling as a pilgrim to help victims of the plague, and until he got the plague himself. So legend says that he was starving in a forest, and a dog came around, again, and gave him a loaf of bread. And not only was he saved, he was miraculously cured of the plague and tried to rule the area, got himself a bit of power. So the whole, in the Grail myths, which is rife around here, there is this legend of the wounded or impotent king, which he thought he was a nation of. But he was unfit. He was said to be unfit to rule the land without a black queen of the earth shown by the nightlight as a sacred priestess to rule with. And again, that is the Black Madonna's personification of that female deity that you had to have by your side to rule the land. And she would then show up and dispense wisdom to Saint Roch and to the people, so or to our worthy hero. So in that context, the Black Madonna then becomes a personification of the negative, or negative not in the understanding of negative as bad, but negative as opposed to the positive. So she is then the feminine current that is needed for the land to be ruled in a whole way, in a whole manner, which is the wholeness, which is obviously also the goal of the Grail romances, which right here as well. So that there are many aspects to the Black Madonna. And who is she? Is she Virgin Mary? I mean, no. It's older than the Christian tradition. But she is here, and there is an essence of the feminine current that she is an avatar of. And there's a lot of them. Often you go into a small church and you go, oh, they've got one. And it's not unusual. But the Black Madonna, right. I know you have a picture of the back of this statue.
Yes, we can move to that quickly.
Exactly. Because
it's incredibly interesting. Yeah, we have it here. I'll just share the screen.
I can hear a dog barking in the background just as we spoke.
Yes, unfortunately, not much I can do about that at the moment.
But we were just talking about dogs, so there you go.
Yes, absolutely. Guardians of the world.
This one is this is the back of the very statue you just showed a picture of, which is in Montserrat. And this is the back of her chair, which people don't see that because it's facing the wall. But you can, if they know who you are, you can borrow the keys at the mairie and lock yourself in and have a look at it. And this is very, there are some symbolism here that I'm not even sure what is, but it's to me that's number symbolism: 3, 6, 9, 12. And it goes up.
It's really peculiar because it looks like sets of standing stones with the moon viewed between them.
Doesn't exactly. Does it
And we've got the lunar cycles, and then we've got basically what look like two Babylonian doors.
right? Seriously, what I see the lunar calendar very, very clearly here, and the standing stone that is actually pointing up into the middle of it, and almost like standing stones further back, and no one's quite sure what this means apart from the lunar calendar is definitely there to kind of link up. But it's an expression in symbol how ancient this current is. All of a sudden we're talking about standing stones, right? So on a statue that lives in a church, I'm finding that fascinating. And by the way, also above her on the, that's not unusual here either, is a pyramid with a light around it that would literally hold above here the tetragrammaton spelled out. So
also there seem to be 19 standing stones, which is a curiously lunar number as well. 19.
Isn't it 12? Because did you not forget the one on the top there?
So that would be 18. Yeah, 19 including the top, isn't it?
Including the top. Okay, you've done it right. Yeah, that's that goes down to if you go into numerology with that, I'm sure somebody could have a field day, but it's a nice little number.
Is it the 19th Atu in the tarot, the moon? I think it is.
I think you are right.
Just before the sun, yes, yeah. So just a point of interest.
Seriously, it's a rabbit hole, and it's just a fascinating thing to see, because this is literally kind of the backside of a Black Madonna statue. But this is also a place here where before the Albigensian Crusade, you had I mentioned the Visigoths and the Moors, but also the Jews were here, and they were often given free, invited. There were pogroms everywhere else, and not a new thing. It still goes on. So they will come up this way, and Girona, which is not that far from here, is the home of the esoteric Kabbalah. So that is this region also is a home for that. So people were free here to think for themselves, worship for themselves, whatever ideas they had, and even you just to kind of jump back real quick to the Cathars, which are very famous. And the thing is, no one really knows what their faith was about. We know about their dualism. We know that they thought it was life on earth, here was hell. So because there is a very little knowledge about it, because obviously they were prosecuted people, and when you prosecute people you take away their culture. That's what genocide is, and the Albigensian Crusade was genocide. So they would literally, after the Crusade, also dig up Cathar graves and smash the bones. They meant business. The Catholic Church means business. So hence there are very, very little to tell us what their faith was about. And we know about the consolamentum, and we know about all of that. We know about the kind of relative vegetarianism, but that's actually where it stops. It's often myths about the Cathar treasure, which is an oxymoron, given that they didn't believe in wealth. So the treasure might have been.
Well, it was obviously not something of this earth, clearly.
Well, and if it was, it would not have been very kind of maybe monetary wealth. It could have been a manuscript. Some people speculate that it was a black meteorite stone that was taken over by the Rosicrucians. We know they got one of them in Amsterdam. I think that's pretty far-fetched. But
this is where we go into the realms of speculation.
Absolutely. And that speculation, is really quite rife here. There's a historical record of Esclamond de Allion, or the bastard Esclamond. Esclamond was niece, because these people lived. The Esclamond de Allion would dress up in man's armor and fight. And on the eve of the burning of the last Cathars at Montségur, before they were frog marched down the mountain and chucked on the fire, there was a group of bishops and favorites and Estremont that rappelled down the wall of the Pog of Montsegur with a treasure, apparently, which they took to Kerbus, which was one of the castles you just showed. So whatever this treasure is. So obviously also in modern times, in modern pop culture, there's a dude called Dan Brown that came up with his idea about what the treasure would have been, and the Grail, and connecting that and to the Montsegur as the Grail Castle, which is, you know, almost an insult to the Cathars, but never mind. So in his theory is that there's a bloodline of the blood of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was said to come here. There's no evidence that she ever did. So that, you know, they would have procreated. But given that the Cathars believed that the ideal life was literally an avatar in a parallel universe with Jesus as a perfecti, means that
I mean, they more or less saw the world as being ruled by the demiurgos, which is like a very Gnostic kind of terminology. So they wouldn't have valued anything in this world. So
no, they would not. But you know, this thing about the bloodline is kind of completely negated by that as well. Because if as the Cathar believed that Jesus was a perfect avatar in a separate universe and he was a perfecti, if he ever walked this planet, he would have been a perfecti. You know, the physical manifestation of him. Obviously they would have said that a perfect, he would never have sired a child, so that puts a stop to the bloodline right there. You know, it's so they would have been quite offended by that story. So yeah, it's I think it's safe to say that story is vastly entertaining. For me, you know, the Da Vinci Code is possibly the best awfully written book I've ever read. You know.
Yes, but as we know, as we generally find, you know, whenever genuine mysteries are put before people's eyes, quite often they'll run a mile in preference to some kind of theory about some kind of buried grail underneath a hill or something like this, rather than actually seeing all of these things as fingers pointing at the moon towards what it is that we've got to find within ourselves and within our connection to the divine principles in our life.
But you know, also in the land here, and you know, if you kind of twist their story a bit, I mean, that whole Da Vinci Code story is, you know, obviously entertaining. But
it's supposed to be entertaining. That's the point, isn't it?
Madly entertaining. But a lot of people think that's gospel. This is the truth. That's how it was, and that's what really happened. And but when you look at historical records here, and look at the goddess worship with a Black Madonna, but also the White Lady, which I'm hoping you'll ask me about.
Ah, yes. I can find a picture of the White Lady any moment if we go on to that subject.
So then what actually happened is more interesting than any book written in the 20th century, and also have a longevity that doesn't necessarily have Tom Hanks in it, but it's a much more interesting story. And the reality of that story is pushed aside in favor of you know, Hollywood fantasy here. But it's absolutely fascinating. So yeah.
Okay, so I think I've got the picture of the White Lady coming up in a moment.
That's okay. I'll just start, shall I?
Yeah, one second. I got it. So there we have.
Yeah, that's one of the, you know, the so-called original white ladies here. The White Lady is actually, you can Google it, the White Lady of Pyrenees, because it's such a untold story that she is directly, you know, Googleable. So we have White Ladies and Black Madonnas and completely impregnable castles. It's all linked. So you know, this one that you're looking at there, that's an ancient statue that was found in a Pyrenean cave. And as it happens, I'm just gonna look this up real quick because I don't want to I don't want to offend her. Yeah, she's 25,000 years old. That's just what I
Woo.
want for. And her
Wow.
name is La Dame de Racempoi. And so already, this is one of the oldest depiction of a recognizable human face found on Earth.
Wow.
And she was found here, and she's kind of the mama of all the white ladies. But you know, the white lady is very common in myth here. People tend to bump into them, the apparitions of luminous white ladies. So there are loads of white lady apparition sites, which you can see because it's always it's a building.
Did you not once tell me many years ago that that was actually one of your first experiences in the area, was coming across something like this?
It was,
Hmm.
but then again, was it? I came across something that I would just call an avatar, maybe of something, but she wasn't white and luminous. So I don't think it was a white lady. But you
Hmm.
know that people who see the white ladies often report to have seen a luminous white thing.
Right.
The White Lady of Montsegur is connected to the Esclamond. And it's said there that, you know, when it's foggy and stormy, and it's fascinating because there's so much iron in the stone here, that when they build
The
castles,
Pyrenees are generally the mountains of iron. Is that correct?
and they are in trade, but what also made people very rich in the Middle Ages when swords, nice thing. But so it's a lot of iron in the stone. So often these old castles almost work as Faraday cages, and in light storms, lightning goes. You know, it's quite fascinating. The lightning just goes poof, straight into the walls.
Yeah, I heard a story of once of two, I think Mount Bucarac, or I think it's called Bucarac or something, and one of the other Pyrenees mountains actually acting as conductors during some of the big storms that they have, where you have horizontal lightning going between them, or charge
That's
discharging between one and the other.
Bugarash. That's what you know.
Bucarac.
That's the tallest mountain in the order, and it's kind of
Right.
packed. And there's a whole kind of lore around that too. But you know that has to do with aliens. I kid you not. I mean, seriously, I'm out when it comes to that. But there's a little cult around that as well. This you know this part of the world have always attracted people. You know, seekers with an open heart, with a calling, and it's easy to pray on it. But I just want to talk a little bit about the White Lady because
Yeah.
so there's one in Montsegur comes out after storm. She's connected to the Esclamond, and it's said that it's a terribly sad story. She would have been burnt herself and frog marched down there on the 16th of April 1244. But she's seen to show herself crying and pointing down at the avatars of the Cathars that were burnt that day. So she's seen as a warning figure. She will warn you. And in Chateau de Puy-Vert, which is also the seat of the Court of Love and the troubadours in the area, there was a visiting princess who drowned because there was a flood, and her ghostly presence is often seen at the edges of the castle. And she comes up there. She has a protective presence. You know, the other one warns, the other one protects. And our castle just up there, I have a very famous ghost or white lady, which is in the one in Puy-Laurent here is connected to Blanche of Bourbon, who was a living person who was killed by her husband, Peter the Cruel, you know, who was the king of Castile. Castile or Aragon? Castile. So it's said that when the moon is in the crescent moon in December, then she is seen on top of the south tower, which is called La Tour de Dame Blanche, La Dame Blanche, where her white things are going in the wind. And she is supposed to have to give you courage. So, you know, they have a job. But, you know, beyond any doubt, the white ladies are seen either in castles, they are seen in caverns or by water. So you see the pattern. And the most famous one is, beyond any doubt, was seen at the White Lady apparition by a young girl in Lourdes in the 19th century who really lived, and her name was Bernadette Sourbiot. You know, there are actually photos of this girl who went to collect water in a cavern in Lourdes, because there was a source there, clean water coming out of the mountain, and sees reports to have comes running back terrified, white in her face, and says that she's seen a ghostly white female apparition. And the family went to the priest, and the priest persuaded Bernadette to, she didn't want to, but persuaded her to go back, and she was then persuaded to say that she had seen this many times, and she had long conversations with the Virgin Mary in that cave. And to this day, Lourdes is there's a basilica on top there, quite impressive one. The Pope's been, so it's a basilica, and Lourdes is the beyond any doubt the most visited sacred site in Christendom, visited by 5 million people annually, and they all go through this cavern and they touch this water, and the way they see it is for them this is an apparition of the Virgin Mary. But it's a White Lady. It's a classic White Lady apparition. So she's an ancient female character of again, pagan stuff that has been transferred into churches. So yes. Oh, you're into caverns now. Yeah, this is the cavern in La Bouche. It's the longest underground river in Europe, and you can go down and travel along them. It's very fascinating. The stalactites, stalagmites, and crystal, and it's a wonderful place down there. There are petroglyphs in there. The temperature is constant on 12 degrees. And it's very, very silent. You can just hear the boat coming. So
yeah, you can see the river running through here as well, like through the caverns, which is
exactly.
really
This is one of the caverns that you can go down into without being a spelunker.
I assume everybody's sitting in a boat here. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And that guy with a helmet, he pulls the boat and tells you about the geology of the area. So. But yeah,
what about the petroglyphs that you mentioned?
Inside of this cavern, there are found petroglyphs, and there are also found skeletons of the people that they think were pre-Roman, which would have been a burial, and also a burial that would have been for high-ranking people. So this is that's an example of how the area here. The Pyrenean limestone caves are some of the biggest limestone caves in the world, and were settled and lived in by the ancients. And there's a particular feeling here because you're in the mother. You're in the belly of the it's the belly of the mother, and she kind of like envelopes you, and it's a very particular feeling to go down there and just experience that. It makes you feel, very small, and also they turn the lights off just to show you how dark it can be, and then you really understand for the people who would inhabit these caves. They would have taken fire down with them, and basically if the fire goes out, they would have been a bit screwed. So. But it's caves everywhere, and some of them are extraordinary cathedrals.
So we've covered an enormous amount, but actually only just scratched the surface in reality. I know that for sure. So this has been a wonderful introduction to the area that you inhabit, and before we wrap up, I just want to give you one more important question. We'll move on to obviously how our viewers can find you and learn more about your work in a moment. But before that, I'll just ask you this question. So all of this that's been presented to us. All of these different fragments of ancient tradition that have been put before us, all of these clues for this and for that. As I said before, fingers pointing at the moon. What does all of it mean for our current age? I mean, here we are. Take a look around you.
Yeah.
Take a look at our own individual lives. Take a look at the way the world is sort of turning out. The general themes which seem to be unfolding around us in our lifetimes as we're doing this interview even. What is all of this trying to indicate to us? What are all of these ancient traditions, these ancient fragments? How can they help us now? How can they help us forwards?
Well, I'm not sure if these traditions are trying because if you say they're trying to indicate, it means that there is some kind of a sentient thing going on there, and I wouldn't necessarily claim that. But what I would say is, we live in a very changing world, which is good. You and I can only talk to each other like this because we have the technology that allows to do it. But that's also the same technology that makes us, distracts us all the time. And maybe it's worth considering that when you have traditions that goes back so far in time as a constant, that can be an antidote to distraction, and it might be helpful for us in that way, because it reminds us about the constancy of the human condition. And also I've been speaking about goddesses a lot because if trust me, if you ask me about Joshua Tree, I would have spoken about masculine stuff. But here the whole goddess worship here, particularly during the Albigensian Crusade and before that, was just so eradicated out and in favor of this extreme patriarchy of the Roman Church, which more or less took over this part of the world. That it's an essence of it is still here. It inhabits the land. You can feel it when you walk on it. It's almost like it comes up your feet, and it feels like it's connecting you in that sense. And one doesn't have to be a woman to feel that and appreciate that, because energies are not necessarily that, it has very little to do with physical gender, but it's an appreciation of half of an energy current, if you think in dualist terms, which might help us feel a bit more whole. And whether these goddesses really existed or whether there are gods and goddesses, is in a way immaterial, and maybe all we need to know, it's good for us to know that there's an essence of something that's still here that was important to people, and it still holds importance, being referred to in buildings, in water sources, in caves, in land itself. You don't really have to go that far to kind of get a great illustration of that kind of dualism, which is clearly seen in the yin and the yang, which which does create that whole the sphere of the whole.
I mean, for example, I recently did an interview with Mantak Chia precisely about this area where I am. Obviously, I'm sitting here in Glastonbury at the moment, but I interviewed Mantak Chia here, who's obviously a famous Taoist master, and this was precisely the point. The whole thing of working. I posed to him the questions of, obviously there's been a lot of people who've put forward ideas. Alfred Watkins in the West, Jean-Michel. All about the different ley lines, the different energy currents, the dragon lines, and so forth. And so I put it to Mantak Chia about how does this fit in with the Taoist work. And what you've done here is pretty much pull together some of the elements that he himself was mentioning last time I interviewed him. It was about the actual the yin and the yang within the practitioner and the landscape.
Indeed. Let me just kind of end. If you don't mind, my contribution to this conversation by saying that that's an illustration of of the oneness of everything, that, you know, and just to speak like a Kabbalist, you know, everything is the essence of everything else. Everything always embodies everything else, and everything mirrors everything else. So, you know, in all kind of sacred traditions, when we cut away all the bling and the what is wrapped in, and you come to the core of it, it's exactly the same ideas that will be found all over the world. But it's particularly
it's what I refer to as the universal tradition. There's a universal tradition behind all traditions. We've only got fragments here and there from this place, from that place, and so yeah, to me, it's waking up to what is the universal tradition behind all traditions.
A version of Solomon's stone, if you want. You know, it's just that kind of alchemy that comes together, and it's interesting to walk this earth, because it's here, it's alive, it hasn't gone anywhere.
I can attest to that. I can attest to that. Being someone who obviously loves to visit as many places in sacred sites, places in the landscape as possible.
We might do it, you know. We might, you and I, might come up with a very good idea.
I think so.
Absolutely. That it would be a shame if we didn't. It would be a waste of an opportunity. But for now, at least, it's I'm just putting it out there that there is more between heaven and earth, or is it? You know.
Okay, so before we go, could you please let our viewers know a little bit more about how they can find you, how they can get in touch with the work you do?
Well, they can get in touch with me in many ways. They can find me on Instagram, magical-retreats.com, because I do retreats and I do them here. And they can also email me on onemagicalretreat@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook under my own name, Tone-Lise Rugås. There is you know, I do many things, but it tends to be connected to the feminine mostly, and to, you know, stuff that that you well know is kind of reminiscence of Freemasonry traditions. If anyone is interested in this area and have any questions, I will absolutely answer them for no money, because it's worth it. It's an important part of us.
Perfect. And we'll be having another part in this series with Tone-Lise again, where we'll both be chatting again sometime soon. And okay, so for now, I think now we go off, and I thank Tone-Lise very much for doing the interview. So thank you all.